Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook video for today, Tuesday, July 8th, 2025. We have quite a bit of things to talk about today, and not from the actual standpoint of activity, but I do want to go over quite a bit of recent climate models that have come out by the NMME and the Euro, and also I'll quickly maybe go over the CANSIPs and stuff like that, which I actually have here on the title card. But the overall thing that I want to go over today is the latest batch of climate models potentially indicates that maybe we might be in for an active hurricane season for the rest of this hurricane season, at least in the Atlantic, such as the NMME, which I'll show you right now, is indicating a potential return of La Nina as we get towards the end of the year. And let's actually start off by showing you that with an Eric Webb tweet. I used to bring up tweets quite a bit in the past, haven't done it in a long time, but we're going to bring it back for this video. Eric Webb tweeted yesterday on when the NMME came out, because it came out yesterday. He said, a pretty decent shift towards La Nina later this fall and winter on the latest NMME. While it's early, the large-scale pattern on some of the models is consistent with a warm western Pacific enforced by ocean dynamical thermostat, and he goes over and links some other studies or something like that I would assume kind of ties back to the potential, which he mentions, and this is probably the most significant part of this tweet, is the potential that the models are now starting to show La Nina for later this season. And I'll show you actually what the NMME shows here. This is for November, December, January on the NMME. And look at the equatorial Pacific. I always talk about this in the off season, how cooler waters along the equatorial Pacific stands for a La Nina pattern, and that is exactly what you see here on the NMME as we head into the winter. And he also brings up the 500 millibar height pattern from the European seasonal, and I honestly tend to be kind of skeptical about large-scale ridging patterns shown by climate models, especially long range, as in a few months out, because they tend to be wrong, and they, especially over the last several years during the winter, have definitely been very, very wrong. But he generally goes over and shows that this is very consistent with the La Nina pattern, especially with a lot of ridging in the subtropics and a stronger polar jet. I'll tell you for sure that that is a much more consistent pattern. Oh, give me a second, I gotta sneeze here. Sorry, had to sneeze. But the pattern that he's generally indicating that the models show, I mean, you gotta sneeze. It's a natural human thing. But let's move on. The models show a La Nina for the winter potentially, and I say the models because not only the NMME shows a more La Nina-like signature, but I'll also show you the European seasonal, which came out a few days ago, and that was, I think, on the 5th. The European seasonal usually comes out every month on the 5th, and this is for August, September, October. So this is for the peak of the hurricane season starting next month. Look out here in the equatorial Pacific, and one thing you notice, we definitely don't have a La Nina, and we also have some of these cooler anomalies, not quite pronounced like maybe the NMME is, which that definitely is a La Nina signature. Probably not a strong La Nina, but that definitely is a cool ENSO weak La Nina signature heading into the winter. And maybe that's not pronounced as much on the European seasonal, but that's definitely a cooler ENSO signal. And as I always say before, no El Nino is just as good enough for an active hurricane season. As long as there's a no El Nino, conditions will be favorable. But European seasonal wise, I guess they're not as bullish on the ACE. I mean, a lot of the models are kind of when it comes to the actual forecast for this hurricane season, but this is the ACE forecast. And the Euro, I mean, they have a average hurricane season, and they have a range that goes potentially slightly above normal. So, and I guess you could also point out too that in both the eastern and the western Pacific, the models overall have the European seasonal indicates a below normal season. So La Nina combined with potentially a below normal West Pack and East Pack, which, I mean, the East Pack, we've definitely not been below normal so far for the last several weeks. But maybe as things are now beginning to slow down in the Pacific, as conditions are becoming less favorable and the MJO is moving out of the Pacific and the West Pac for quite a bit of time, there's been indications that we would have a humongous powerhouse typhoon. And we did have a pretty strong typhoon that impacted Taiwan a few days ago. But the West Pac 2 has kind of seemed to struggle, especially throughout the year so far. And as I always say as well, when the Pacific is not active, somewhere in the world has to take over, and especially in this case, usually the Atlantic takes over, especially when you consider the fact that we have potentially a La Nina pattern in play. And then fast forward to today, this is something that actually came out today, the TSR, tropical storm risk from, I believe, the UK, released their forecast, their latest updated forecast for this hurricane season, and they predict kind of on schedule with what the European shows, or kind of in lockstep with what the European shows, and that is actually a pretty much damn near average hurricane season. 15 named storms, 7 hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes, and that's a slight downtick from what they showed in May, when they had a slightly above normal season with 16.84. They had an ACE score of 146. This time around, with their latest forecast they released today, they show a full 20 points less. I'm not actually sure, though, if I entirely agree, especially with the named storms. I don't know. I mean, we've had 3 storms in just the last 2 weeks recently, with Andrea all the way to Chantal, which dissipated yesterday. And just a few weeks ago, everybody was saying that we would enter the month of July without a single storm. And now we're here July 8th, not even mid-July yet, and we had Chantal. So I don't know about the named storm aspect, and especially because of the fact that the models are showing La Nina. I don't know. But it's very interesting that the TSR came out today, and right on cue with the Euro, or pretty much, exactly like the Euro shows, they have pretty much a near normal season. And we could judge the forecast and, kind of compare it to what we have today with the sea surface temperature anomalies right now, especially in the Atlantic. Very, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies. And probably the most significant part about the Atlantic is notice how warm the sea surface temperature anomalies are, especially in the Western Atlantic, closer to home. Because especially if this year maybe is not as active out in the deep tropics here, we're not having as much as these deep tropical storms that produce lots of ACE, and maybe kind of cut down on the named storm count a little bit. We've seen in the past several years just how quickly storms very close to home can get going, and in a matter of 1 to 2 days, they become major hurricanes and become very impactful storms for the United States, which is us, where we live. So it's very, very important to keep that in mind, especially the Gulf here and the Northern Gulf, very, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies, and astonishingly off the southeast, especially in the Western Atlantic, near Bermuda, this has been really warm for a long while. And then it was actually slightly warmer here right off the southeast coast, but obviously, since we just had Chantal, some of the waters were mixed up and cooled a little bit, but trust me, it'll warm up very significantly, especially as we head into August. I mean, we're pretty much in the thick of summer right now. The rays of the sun are beating on the ocean. Trust me, this is going to warm up. This whole area, especially surrounding the southeast and especially in the Gulf, tends to warm up very quickly this time of year. I mean, we are quite literally in the thick of summer. And then you see here right now, no El Nino in the Pacific. We have especially these cooler anomalies as well in the northern Pacific. associated with the negative PDO pattern, which is kind of keeping a lid on Eastern Pacific activity, which is why a lot of the activity we've had in the Eastern Pacific, even though we've had a lot of it, it would not really become strong, or if it did become strong, it would be very, very quick, and not last long at all. And the game now is, or the thing now to see, or I guess it's a wait and see game now, as I was probably going to say, does this Pacific area cool down, and do we eventually see a La Nina return like the models are showing? And I'll show you here with the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Nina 3.4. Looks like in the past several weeks things have actually warmed up a little bit, but the latest value right now, 0.1 degrees Celsius above normal, far below the El Nino threshold that we need, and it's kind of gone up and down a little bit over the past several weeks. We would go up, and then we would cool back down. Very typical for us to happen in an ENSO neutral like we have this year. And I would imagine, especially that the climate models came out today showing potentially La Nina as we head into the fall and winter. I'd imagine this warming trend that we have in the ENSO 3.4 right now will probably not last, and we'll probably see a cooling down of this very shortly. But what's even more interesting is, as I just showed you, the Eastern Atlantic, the MDR, is very warm. And notice, especially over the last several weeks since June, how much we've seen in terms of warming in the Eastern Pacific. Not the Eastern Pacific, the Eastern Atlantic. And it's not like this is April or March and we are months away from the hurricane season. We are in July now, and we are just weeks away from the peak of the hurricane season happening. And so this is very interesting that we're seeing the Eastern Atlantic warm up like this. And this will be something that we'll have to watch very, very closely, especially as we head into the peak. And I'll show you why we need to watch this, and potentially watch within the next few weeks to see if it pans out and this contributes to anything at all. But I'll show you that in a moment. And really quickly, going over current Atlantic activity. This is the dashboard by the Colorado State University. This goes over global tropics, and going over what's happening right now in the Atlantic. We have 3 named storms. Obviously, we just had Chantal this weekend, and the average for this time of year is typically just under 2 named storms, or we're getting to our second named storm very soon. So we are definitely above average in named storms. Although in the other counters like named storm days and ACE, that's more or less dependent on how long a storm lasts, and we're definitely not there yet in terms of named storms and ACE, and maybe in a year like this especially, where the pattern is a little bit a little weird, and we've had a lot of these very quick spin ups, especially Andrea, Barry, and even Chantal was a kind of quick spin up that occurred on very short notice. You will not get the ACE extremely high. It's kind of these very small storms that produce a little bit of ACE, but obviously they are impactful, as we saw with Chantal, bringing lots of heavy rain to portions of inland North Carolina. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to the ACE for now, but this will definitely be something as well that we'll be watching very closely as we head into the peak of the season. But interesting to compare to now. We are already above normal, and at least with the climate models indicating that we're going to go back to La Nina potentially, or at least the potential is there for La Nina to emerge once again as we head into the winter. Maybe we'll continue to stay above normal for the rest of the hurricane season. We'll just have to see. Wouldn't surprise me, though, and I've been saying that I think this season will be above normal, and so far, kind of has already begun to pan out. But taking a look at the Atlantic right now, taking a satellite image, you could see not much else happening in the Atlantic. So for now, things are going to be quiet. We have lots of dry air and dust, especially in the Eastern Atlantic, as typical this time of year. July tends to be the peak of the Saharan air coming off and really pumping out from Africa. The trades are really strong this time of year. So we typically don't watch in the Eastern Atlantic anyways. And here in the Western Atlantic, we have this nice little trough, or I guess that maybe a weak tropical wave in here that's producing convection over the Bahamas. And I did mention yesterday or 2 days ago that the European or some of the models were kind of showing something trying to perk up off the East Coast once again. But there's really no signal, or there never was a major signal for that. But anyways, this was the piece of energy. That's what I wanted to point out to you. This was the piece of energy that the models were pointing out, and it's definitely producing something. I mean, it's producing convection, probably heavy rain and gusty winds, and obviously that is a nuisance. It doesn't have to be a designated tropical system in order for it to produce tropical storm-like conditions. So probably going to get some heavy rain and gusty winds, especially throughout the northern Bahamas through today. But probably will not see any major development out of this. And I'll show you on the GFS, and I'll show you the Euro too. Why not go over both? At least taking a look at the next week on the models, things looking nice and quiet for now. The GFS out to hour 168, which is the next week. You can see obviously nothing major shows up. Maybe a little bit of an interesting thing with this wave here. Maybe that's just the GFS showing a strong tropical wave. You can kind of watch it, but it doesn't really consolidate much. But in terms of any actual major development, nothing showing up on the GFS within the next week. Although, as you can see, they're still trying to show some development occur in the Eastern Pacific, and maybe we might get another named storm or so in the Eastern Pacific soon, although it's definitely beginning to slow down, especially compared to the last several weeks. And then I'll really quickly bring you to the 0 to European, because the 6E does not go out to a full week. And here too on the European, take it out to the next week or so, nothing major developing. So at least for the short-term future, nice and quiet with nothing major going on in the Atlantic. And do they develop anything in the Eastern Pacific? Kind of curious, not from what I could see. So continuing with the slowdown potentially in the Eastern Pacific. So things remaining nice and quiet for now, for the short-term future in the Atlantic. But as I mentioned, really got to pay attention to see how the Atlantic shapes up over the next several weeks, especially because, and I want to close out with this, this is a very interesting thing that I saw from Danny Morris as well as I was putting together this video. And he posted this a few days ago, but this was the European model for the 11th to 18th of next month, so August, when we're starting to get more active and we're starting to transition into the peak of the hurricane season. And yes, the European weeklies, the weekly models already go that far out. They already go out to mid to late August, so we're already starting to see how the pattern could potentially shape up for the peak of the season, and that'll definitely be interesting to watch here over the next several weeks as we continue to march into the peak. Danny Morris says that upper-level easterlies dominate the deep tropics from Africa through the entire Caribbean, indicating that the TUT, which is tropical upper tropospheric trough, which is typically produces shear in the Atlantic and is not very favorable for us, if you're wondering what that is, has been displaced to the northeast, opening the door for African easterly waves and other disturbances to develop and to reduce wind shear. And SSTs should warm as well by mid-August, and I just showed you that is already beginning to happen, especially in the Eastern Atlantic. So with that all being said, it looks like potentially the signs are maybe that the rest of this hurricane season will potentially be active, and that's pretty much what I've been trying to tell you this entire video. If there's one thing you're going to take away from today's video, is that according to the latest model data, it looks like potentially we might be in for an active hurricane season this year. And as I said, so far it's already panning out. We already have 3 storms down. Wouldn't be surprised if we end up at least in the named storm category with an above normal season. The rest, we'll just have to see how it all pans out. But certainly a lot to talk about and a lot to keep on top of here going into the next several weeks, especially as we are in July and we will soon be in August and we will be in the peak of the hurricane season. That is it for today's video, though. Not much else to go over. Hope you enjoy what you saw today. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. As always, I'll be back with more tomorrow.